Welcome back to This Was Supposed to Be Easy, your go-to podcast for connection, joy, and a good dose of laughter.
Hosted by two friends who've seen enough of life to know that it's never as simple as it sounds
or looks.
Each conversation celebrates the diverse journeys we travel, the moments of bravery, the strength we didn't know we had, and the joy we find along the way.
Because let's be honest, life is full of things that were supposed to be easy, but turned out to be harder.
And definitely funnier
than we thought. This is Amy.
And this is Cheryl. And if it were easy, we wouldn't be here. When was the last time you paused and really celebrated something you did? Not brushed past it, not minimized it, but actually let it land. I asked Amy this question right before we started recording, and both of us struggled with coming up with an answer about our own celebrations and opportunities that might have passed recently. And so it just makes me think that if you're anything like us, you probably moved right on to the very next thing that was happening or needed to happen in your life. And we both think that this is something that we should talk about with you all. We both think that it happens a lot in our worlds. Amy, what do you think?
I think that is a great idea today.
When I think about why we do that, why we just keep on trucking along and often miss opportunities to acknowledge or even celebrate something that we accomplished, a lot of that circles back to maybe the way that we were raised and the ideas that were put into our brains, into our behaviors as far as what is expected of us as we grow up.
So one of the things that I think about as we're kind of talking about this, and it was something that just popped into my head actually, is I often feel like there is a very specific timeline that goes along with the celebration of the completion of something. And the reason I have an example of that. So for my kids, I always do a big 16-year-old birthday trip that it's just myself and them. With Ella, she didn't know anything about it. We went to Florida. We went to Harry Potter, did all the things. It was super cool. It was an amazing trip. And so a little bit different. My middle child, he turned 16 back in August. And knowing that I do this, like he kind of had some opportunities. So he's really spent the last 2 years talking about, like thinking about where he wanted to go. It's changed many times. And we had decided, and we knew in August it wasn't going to be an ideal time to go. So then we were going to do it in September, and I had multiple other trips. And so it did end up happening in November, like the week after I got back.
I remember all your crazy trips were
right.
happening.
Yeah, I had like 7 trips, like over the course of 3 months. It was crazy. And so I had gone to New Zealand, got back, and then literally 5 days later left for Las Vegas. Mitchell and I went to Las Vegas for a long weekend, took a lot of great pictures, ended up having just the best time. It was really cool. Got to meet one of my friends from my classes that I had only ever met online, got to meet her in person. Like there were some really cool things, but again, took a lot of pictures, did all those things. And then when it came to like social media, I remember with my daughter's trip, I had like documented all of it and said on it, like, we did this to celebrate her 16th birthday. I'm not putting this here to brag or show off in any way, shape, or form. Just, I really enjoy when memories pop up, and I want to like drop this here. And people commented and positive and things like that. And then I realized though, with Mitchell's trip, I was thinking about this the other day. I never posted a single picture like of our trip together. And I worried that it somehow like diminished, but I know it didn't. So I don't feel like, it's not that like, oh, if I didn't make it social media worthy or ready, then it didn't happen, anything like that. But it was almost like, because he had taken pictures on his phone, I had pictures on mine. We ended up doing like a shared Google Drive dumping pictures into them. So I didn't have all the pictures to post when I was going to post it right after our trip. And then we were kind of moving into Christmas and I was, recovering from kind of a whirlwind of traveling. That was the last trip. And then actually had a conference to go to, all these things. But I never celebrated that. And like the biggest thing that I did was, to our listeners, you've listened many times. We talk about our bingo cards for the year. That was something on my 2025 bingo card. And so the biggest celebration was getting to mark it off. And I didn't do kind of the things. And I felt weird about that because now I'm like, all right, now that we're 4 or 5 months past, like, would it be strange to post those pictures? But still thinking of posting them just for the fact of having them because I really like that, hey, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, here's something cool that you did. I do think it's an awesome experience. And I'm proud of doing that with my children. And I've had other friends and other people I've known that have said, like, that's a really cool idea. The idea of doing a one-on-one trip, like I would, I want to take that idea too. So I do think there is something about just kind of bringing awareness of what it's like, especially if you have multiple children, to get to experience them one-on-one and what that looks like. But I don't know. There wasn't a celebration. There wasn't really even an acknowledgement, and it felt strange. So kind of as we're talking about those things, that's one of the situations that have jumped in my head of like, I don't know why I didn't do it, except I felt like there was only a certain timeline that maybe I could celebrate this thing. And why was it such a short timeline in my head? I don't know, but it's something that I realize I did that I'm thinking about maybe revisiting.
Amy, there's so much to unpack.
I just my long-winded ramble there.
No, because, when you started talking, I thought about the only other person I know who does something similar, does a trip like that for a child's birthday. And as you were talking and you brought up posting on social media, I really also had some ideas about how sometimes we don't post a celebration on social media, or we don't go to social media to share something that's exciting for us or an accomplishment because we have this, I don't know, deep seated fear that we're bragging. And, there's some risk with that, but that's not where you went with it. I think you were really thinking about, I celebrated my daughter's 16th birthday in this way on social media. And then I didn't do it with my son's. And now I don't know how to get back to it. But there's a third thing I'm thinking about, which is just the basic celebrating the birthday, right? Like you celebrating with your child. You've hit this big milestone. I, as a parent, have hit this big milestone with you, which you did celebrate. You literally got on a plane and went with him to Las Vegas. And that was the celebration. But because maybe it wasn't saved in memoriam, like in Facebook, it felt different. It's interesting, isn't it?
Well, it is. And it also, I think there was some, going back to kind of that timeline, I wonder because with Ella's trip, we did it like 6 weeks before her birthday because it was such a surprise. We did it in the summer. It was before her birthday.
Mhm.
With Mitchell, it being 3 months post birthday or, 2.5 months post birthday, it already felt like I was behind in some weird sort of way
Mhm.
because in the way that I'm looking at it, the trip was the trip, the experience was the experience, all amazing, all really cool. I do think that there, is that like I said, little bit of bragging feeling, but yes, that memoriam like type of way of recognizing it, did it somehow
Yeah.
discredit the celebration of actually doing it?
Yeah. And as someone who loves to savor moments, I love the idea that you can, savor something that's in the past. And maybe that would be an opportunity to just offer a reflection on, oh, today I'm thinking about how great it was to get to celebrate. I'm not coaching right now. I'm not asking you any questions, Amy. I'm just offering a way that maybe it could happen.
Yes.
But again, I think I just wanted to say that there are opportunities out there like this 16th birthday example, setting the social media part aside. There's opportunities out there to celebrate more than getting married and having an anniversary, having a baby, getting a big promotion at work.
Right.
You mentioned a very specific birthday that you want to celebrate with each of your children. But as you and I have had this conversation, there are things inside of the big moments that I would love to celebrate more. I guess I'll put it that way.
I would love to as well, because all of those things that you just mentioned, like the getting married, the having kids, the promotion, I'll even add in like a buying a house, some of those types of things. One, it doesn't happen for everybody.
Hmm.
Some of those things one time in our life,
Yeah.
maybe if we're lucky, two or three, depending on if we have more children, maybe if there are different opportunities for ways that relationships go, I don't know, those types of things. But also not everybody experiences them either. And so does that really kind of say that anybody should be less celebrated than somebody else? And I would tend to say, no, that. And the other thing too is celebrations are fun. And in the most basic of terms, celebrations are fun. And couldn't we all benefit from a little bit more fun in our life? Those are just some of those kind of thoughts that pop into my head with that.
Yeah. I am thinking that I believe that celebrating wins can incorporate I don't want to diminish the wins, right? By saying such small wins, but how could we bring more happiness and live more joyfully by acknowledging important steps, important stages of the work that we're doing. Important, like my flowers bloomed. I kept them alive long enough to bloom. I think about my role as a professor and how when I teach my 500 level class, which is almost at the end of their program, they're like, I'm going to graduate in May. That's a huge moment. I want you to celebrate that. Let's celebrate getting through a semester. Like, let's look for those ongoing wins that can bring that fuel to us on a more regular basis. I think that there's research out there that supports celebration.
I think so too. And it's interesting. One of the things that I do every term, I have a printout of my whole program that I keep kind of on my wall, literally right in front of my work computer. And every term, so every 8-week term, I put a check mark by the classes that I have completed. Now, after this last term, I have half of the page with the check mark. So I'm halfway through the program.
Mhm.
And I think even that is something that I've mentioned in passing. I know we woohooed with, finishing the first year, but I think even for myself, recognize, like, because I literally go from one class ending on a Sunday to the next class starting on Monday, and there isn't that, like, even week off time period. It's just constantly moving. But those check marks by a successful term, meaning I completed something, really does feel huge, even though I don't talk about it. And so, what I think about with that is maybe, in the future, it's worth saying, like, hey, let's go out to dinner, or let's go do something. Or I guess even too, what are some recognitions for those little things? Because everything I heard you saying too as well is really celebrating the effort, not only the accomplishment. Because celebrating the effort along the way, there's a fair amount of celebration. And sometimes that effort celebration is what keeps you going to the end.
Yeah. It's the baby steps, right? Like we've had conversations about the baby steps. To get to most bigger accomplishments, you have to take the baby steps, and every step you take is worthy. and important and gets you maybe closer to a big goal, or is just in and of itself really important and exciting. And I think I'm just here to say, like, let's incorporate that more into our identity. Being a person who celebrates others, but also is somehow able to celebrate our own wins by lighting a candle and eating a piece of chocolate, by saying thank you when someone acknowledges it instead of brushing it aside.
As we're talking about all of this, I think about some of the habits that maybe I have leaned into in the past and how I don't want to. I've been working really hard, I should say, to kind of not do it. But one of them is the idea of like deflecting praise. And so I think this is also the way that we kind of teach people then how to interact with us. For our listeners, I have, maybe some ideas, if this is you, of ways that you can think about it. And here's where I'm going with it. So there's been plenty of times that I've had something big happen. Like, let's say getting a promotion. And I can even say this. So I ended up receiving a promotion this past fall, and a friend of mine had heard about it, or a friend of ours had heard about it, and said, like, can I say something to the group? We were all together. And I was like, no, don't. This is like so and so's night. I don't want to like tell everybody. And I was uncomfortable. And she's like, nope, I'm doing it. And like it was very sweet of her. And I'm ultimately happy that she did, but it was really hard for me to have that celebration happen because I didn't want to take away from somebody else. I didn't want to, it didn't feel as big. And I'd be the first one to jump in line if somebody else had a promotion or if somebody else did. And so I definitely did that thing where it's like, sweep it under the rug. No, it's not a big deal. It's not a big thing. But I think the bad part about that is that when we do that, we teach other people that they shouldn't. The next time, that they might get a promotion, or the next time something good happens to them, if we can't kind of accept or talk about the good things that happen to us.
Yeah, you're
And
modeling.
so, yeah, so I think too, if this is something that is uncomfortable for you, and I'm going to even say just receiving praise kind of in any way. So let's say, think about for yourself, if you're out getting breakfast and somebody says like, oh, I love your shirt, or I love your necklace, or your hair is beautiful. Are you the person that says, thank you? Or are you the person that says, oh, this old thing, I've had it forever? And like, do you deflect? And, I know we've talked about that before in other things, but it fits here when it comes to like the celebrations of our everyday existence as well, because it's a behavior that I bet if you thought about the way that you would deflect for those baby steps, you probably deflect in other ways too. And so then it teaches those around us two things. One, like I've heard it before about like giving the compliment, like it's the other person, it's like somebody gives you a compliment and it's almost like you turn around and hand it back, not in a compliment, but say like, oh, I shouldn't have this, so don't compliment me anymore. But then the other thing too is if you turn down the win, the success, the somebody acknowledging it, even though you would never want to not do that for somebody else, do they feel like then they can't tell you of the next time that they get a win or something to celebrate because you turned down yours?
Yeah.
And so I think that's something, if this is difficult for you, one, look at why, but two, think about it from somebody else's standpoint. Wouldn't you want to be the representation or the guidance of how to do something for somebody else, even if it's difficult, because you wouldn't want somebody else to soften their win or not celebrate something big?
It's sort of like the negative chatter that happens in your mind. You often will talk to yourself in your head very negatively, critique yourself, say things to yourself that you would never say to a friend. And, that concept of start to talk to yourself like you would talk to a friend. What you're saying is celebrate yourself like you would want your friend, like you would want your child, like you would want your partner to be able to celebrate their wins. But it's so socialized, I think, in us, to soften our wins, like we just said a few minutes ago, so that we're not bragging, so that we're not too much, or we deflect that praise. And sometimes it's good to make sure that we pass the praise on to everybody who deserves it if it was a team effort. But sometimes we do that when it really was our win. And, we just get stuck in that area of minimizing our efforts. And we wouldn't want others to do that. So I don't know. I'm thinking about ways to maybe remind myself, would I do this to my friend? This thing that I'm doing to myself. So, Amy, as we think about maybe why we tend to avoid celebrating ourselves. And, we've talked about the fear of being too much or bragging. We've talked about, the deflecting or, softening that win. Another thing that I know I've talked about in other contexts, but because it's something I get to revisit every semester. And actually now I'm teaching a class in double time. And so I revisited it in the first 8 weeks, and now I'm about to revisit it in the second 8 weeks. It's that idea of moving the goalpost. We forget to pause and celebrate something that deserves celebration because we think, well, there's the bigger end game, so I'll celebrate then. But as soon as we get to whatever that is, we move the goalpost. We immediately raise the bar because there's always something else on the to-do list. As people who love to learn and love to grow, there really is always something else. But all of that becomes more rich and more fulfilling and again, more joyful, I believe, if we take those pauses and honor them instead of jumping right to moving the goalpost and saying what's next. I'm going to use our podcast, Amy, for a couple of examples. We have some big goals in terms of numbers of listeners or how many downloads and things like that. But it takes a long time to get to some of those big goals, those big numbers. And so we've taken small moments to say, we made it to episode 10. We made it to episode 20. We very recently did an episode about what we've learned in the first 50 podcast episodes. And so I think that those might be good, very small examples of shout outs to we did it. We got this far. Let's not just keep upgrading, the destination that's down the road and making that bigger. Let's pause and say, hey, we did this.
We did. And, thinking about that, I think, yes, we celebrated the 50th episode and now we're past that. But I do think it's important to recognize we've been doing this for a year. And this is a win that I think we should recognize even in that we have been doing our podcast now for a year and it's our podcast birthday.
It's our birthday.
Yes.
Yay. So maybe let's do a little bit of a flip and at least talk about the importance of celebrations, not just why it's hard for us and what we do to deflect it, but the purpose of celebration, the reason that it's okay to acknowledge a win. Because, I said a little bit earlier, I think that celebration can become a fuel that fills our cup, that keeps us going, that even reinforces who we are. Like you and I have talked about, can we say yet that we're podcasters? Was it the 10th episode? Was it the 50th episode? Was it the 1-year birthday? Like, do we have an identity yet that is a podcaster? And I think that when we can honor those moments with celebration, it does help us to see ourselves more in that light of being successful and of accomplishing something.
Yes. And, it made me think about something else a little bit too. And that is that sometimes within our own identities. So I've talked about before being diagnosed a couple of years ago with ADHD, and it kind of opened my eyes to a lot of things. I have other individuals in my family who have also been diagnosed, and we've all kind of recognized certain things within it. That sometimes follow through can be difficult because if something loses its newness or loses its shininess, to stick with something even if it is working can sometimes be difficult. And so I think too, the celebration sometimes of staying with something past the shiny and newness. Now, I'm not saying staying with something that isn't working. I'm saying staying something that's lost like the brilliance of it and becomes more familiar, that there is win in that too. And that those are because when we can celebrate our follow through, especially when follow through is hard, we're also reshaping our brain and reshaping our identity as someone who does follow through. So I think that every time we're able to have a bit of our personality of who we want to be demonstrated to us through an actionable thing, it's worth celebrating, because maybe the celebration is we're getting a little bit closer to being the person we want to be and how that looks. And again, it's all those steps that we take to do all the things that we've done that's worth celebrating instead of waiting to celebrate 10 years in the future.
Yeah, Amy, I'm thinking about you. I'm thinking about, this huge conference that you were a part of a team that just put on, and how, at the end of it, I hope that you all were able to just sit with it for a minute and just, I mean, I know there's more work, there's debriefing, there's what are we going to do next time, but I hope that people who are listening who have finished something big and even not so big can literally maybe, practice the motion of, or even the words of, let me just sit with this for a second. Let me just sit with this for the weekend and soak it all in, or whatever that moment of time is, to just shift away from what's next to sitting with it.
Okay, so listeners, we're going to turn it back over to you. And that is that we would love for you to think about maybe what's something that you missed out on celebrating, that was something that you could take a few minutes. And again, celebrating doesn't have to be huge with a bunch of other people. It could be with one other person in your life. It could be talking about something in a way. It could be you yourself kind of putting that bookend and saying like, hey, I did this. But we would love to know, and if you're willing to share it out to us, what is something that you are taking the time to celebrate right now? And that little win that works for you, so that you can say that you are a person that celebrates yourself and feel good about it. Thanks for tuning in to This Was Supposed to Be Easy. Remember, the best stories are the ones we live.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and keep the conversation going, because life may not be easy, but listening in should be.
Stay curious, stay connected, and keep wondering.